Let's open our Bibles to the Gospel according to Luke, and we're in chapter 22, the last verses of chapter 22. This is an eclipse of the heart and mind, and it's something that should be avoided at all cost. Because it could happen to any of us. It's a self-induced darkness. It's something that happened to some people that we often like to say, oh, they're the bad guys. But no, they're just us. And they're as bad as we can be at any given time. And I think many of them thought they wanted to be good. They thought they wanted to live a good life. These were the religious folks, the religious leaders. And we see their judgment. They cast their vote. They put their judgment upon Jesus, but it falls upon themselves. And it happened on what the Bible speaks of as the darkest day that ever took place. A time when right in the middle of the day, when you think it's going to be the brightest, we're told that darkness fell over the whole face of the land. And so, going back a bit, in the Garden of Gethsemane, back in the night before, the Passover night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, we read verse 45, let's start there, that Jesus got up. He arose from his prayer. But he came to his disciples. He found them sinking down from their sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. And while he was still speaking, behold, this multitude came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them. And he approached Jesus to kiss him, and Jesus said, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And a certain one of them, Peter, we happen to know, struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered this, saying, stop it, enough, no more of this. And he touched that man's ear and he healed him. And then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders, all of these who had come out against him, he said, have you come out with swords and clubs as though against a robber? While I was with you in the daylight, while I was with you in the daytime, there in the temple, you never laid hands on me. But this hour and the power of darkness belongs to you. So here he says, this is your problem. It's nighttime, but the darkness he's talking about wasn't something overhead. In fact, I don't know if it was a super moon or a blood moon or anything like that. I know it was a full moon because it was Passover, and Passover was always full moon. And if you looked up, there was actually quite a lot of light. But he's not talking about the darkness overhead. He's talking about the darkness in the heart. And he says, this is what belongs to you because you want it. This is what you hold. This is the power you hold. And the power they hold over him as they take him off to try him, it's that power that they liked to stay in. One that, good news, you don't have to. Good news, I don't have to. I don't like the darkness. I'm glad that I don't have to belong there. I'm glad that I don't belong there. But he says to these guys, that's the problem. This hour and the power of darkness belongs to you. And as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, if the light that's within you is darkness, how great is the darkness? If the darkness isn't something overhead, but in your heart, if the way that light comes inside of you is somehow distorted and twisted, how will light ever get inside of you? So this is the problem that these religious leaders have as they all come against him to arrest him here. And it says, verse 54, having arrested him, they led him away and they brought him to the house of the high priest. But like we've seen for the last few weeks, Peter following at a distance, and then all the troubles that causes for Peter. But here's Jesus brought to the high priest. And the first trial that Jesus faced on that day was the religious trial. Now, two parts of the religious trial took place in the darkness, took place at night, early morning hours. He went to the two high priests when there's only supposed to be one. He goes to Caiaphas, to Annas, the two high priests. It's in the courtyard of the high priest that Peter has his own little trial going on. But the first two parts are secret. They're illegal. There's something done that shouldn't have been done. They do those first two things at night, and then finally in the day, as soon as the sun comes up, now we're going to stamp it as official. Now it's legal. Now it's just. Now he comes before the whole council. Now what we've already decided in the darkness, we're going to say, that's the way it is. And that's the way the religious trial played out. And it says something really about us all. And it says something about religion. And here Jesus says, this is what you want, this is what you do. And that's what we've been reading about. So it's at the dawn, it's at the beginning of this day that we start our study today. In the nighttime, in the darkness, don't be afraid of the dark. We've seen last week the face of a friend, the face of Jesus. The light of Jesus shone through all of his trial. Peter had his problems, man, I can relate. But Jesus was always himself. And though Luke doesn't tell us a lot about the time before Annas and the time before Caiaphas, you can be assured that Jesus never lost his love. He never lost his light. He never lost his joy. You know, back in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, my soul is distressed to the point of death. And he was just asking a couple of friends to stay awake and pray with him. They failed, and Jesus said, hey, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. He understood that. But he rose from prayer. And once he rose from prayer, once he came off from that sweating great drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, from that point on, all the way up to the time when he cried out, it's finished. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He despised the shame. He didn't lose his joy, didn't lose his hope, didn't lose his light, didn't lose his love. It was present through all the trial, and that's what Peter saw. It says there in verse 61, like we looked at last week. 61 says, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And as we studied more precisely last week, when that face turned toward Peter, it was a face that had been beaten and bruised, insulted in just about every way, spat upon. And yet when that face turned with the same light, the same love, then Peter, his heart so fearful, it melted into tears, and he went out. He went out to be alone. It's not what the Lord wanted, but that's a beginning. He stopped the stupid stuff he was doing. And all of that we read, and that's who Jesus is still. He's still that friend. He's always, yesterday, today, forever. He's the same. We've seen it, and then for our part, this last section, these last 6 verses or so of chapter 22, is the final judgment. The final religious judgment. And it says there in verse 66, 22:66, that when it was day, you know, the minute it just started to be daylight, because again, the law said you cannot try a person at night. So as soon as it's day, this is good, this is fair, this is legal. Not just, but it's fair, it's right. We're going to follow the letter of the law. These are the people that every dot, every crossing of the T, they're the Pharisees to some extent, the Sadducees, the different religious rulers. So as soon as it starts to become day, now we're going to pass our judgment. As soon as it starts to look like it's going to be legal, but there's nothing legal about it. They've already made their decision in the darkness. And in fact, the law said that if it's going to be a capital offense, if you're going to kill the guy over it, you have to wait 2 days. It can't just be in the day. You have to give it one more day, because you know what? You may be wrong. Before you cut someone off, before you say this is who you are and that's all you are, you better give it at least a day, right? Give it a little time. And bear in mind, all of this is for you. I'm not here talking about religious people long ago. All of this is for us. And it's all part of what Jesus keeps telling us. Watch out for yourself. Beware of yourself. Be concerned about yourself and what you can do in the darkness, and then you pronounce it. It's just, it's legal. I did it. Look, I followed the letter of the law, but you didn't follow the spirit of the law. For the law of liberty, the one that sets you free, the perfect law is always the law of love. And that's gone here in this whole scene. But they're following the letter of the law. As soon as it's day, as soon as the sun starts to come up, the sun starts to shine, Jesus never stopped shining, and now these people are going to bring down the gavel. And that's why it's the darkest day. That's why this day is so dark. This isn't just this isn't the Supreme Court of the United States. This isn't any civil tribunal. This is the religious tribunal of the one great religion that God gave to Moses. And now here they are condemning the Christ. And that should say something to all of us about ourselves. So that's why it's the darkest day. And as soon as the sun starts to come up, these people are going to pass their judgment. Now, we already know the judgment they're going to pass. In fact, they already knew the judgment they were going to pass. They had decided it way back in Mark's gospel. It was as early as chapter 3 of Mark's gospel that they began to conspire about how are we going to destroy him. Because he's messing with our business. He's messing with our pride. He's messing with our position. He's messing with all the things that make us who we are. And maybe they weren't that brutally honest with themselves. It would have been nice if they would have been. They thought they were the defenders of the right, defenders of the status quo, defenders of the system, defenders of the ways of Moses. They really thought, or at least they really seemed to think, that they were right in all the things they were doing. But they passed this final judgment, and the verdict they passed upon Jesus fell upon them. And again, it's not woe to them. It's woe to us, because you know what? It's the same way. As it was for the Son of Man, so it is with all of men. The judgments you pass upon others fall upon you. So don't judge lest you be judged. Don't condemn lest you be condemned. Be merciful, and mercy will come back your way. Basic principles, you all know. We've heard it a bunch of times. Just be careful. Because what these people did that day was so terrible. So terrible. And yet, God help me, that I don't allow that to take place in my heart. Their minds were made up. They'd already made their decision. And now they say, he's guilty. And again, one more time, my emphasis of all of this, my slowing down to let's think about it, let's look at it, is not just so we can slow down. Slowing down is a good idea for safety's sake, for learning's sake. Did you get the message? We slow down not so that we can harshly judge them. Wow, what a bunch of wretches they were to make the judgment they did that day. It's not to harshly judge them, it's to better judge ourselves. Because you know the proverb that says, when you look in a mirror, or back then you looked in water to see your reflection, just as in water face reflects face, so in the same way man reflects man. When you see other folks, you see something about yourself. And in this particular case, you people, you're in a church today. And not just any church, a church that actually studies the Bible. That's a good thing. Now, God, help us to learn the Bible. And these were the people who memorized the Bible, at least as much as they had the Old Testament. And yet they made this judgment. And so as man reflects man, I would say religious men reflect religious men. Religious people reflect religious people. The kinds of quick condemnations, quick, get it over with, make the judgment. The quick passage of judgment that they could make, maybe, just maybe we could make. And it's not for me to say, and you're doing this and you're doing that, and I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. But I want to hear this message and get it into my heart and just not be so quick to pass judgment. Not be so quick to say, hey, I know what it's about. Not be so quick to cut off. Because whenever we cut off something, someone, Jesus has many teachings about how we deal with one another, how we deal with our brethren, how we deal with the fact that we belong to one another. When you make that cutoff, no longer can you learn, no longer can you grow, no longer can you benefit from that other part of who we all are. The Lord came to reconcile us. We just want to cut and run. We just want to find a place of peace by putting certain people out of our lives. And so again, the whole gospel of reconciliation and forgiveness and love, it has vast application. And that's up for you. That's the work. You and hearing the Holy Spirit and learning in your own life. Where am I quick to condemn? Where am I quick to be the religious judge over others? Where is love lacking in my life? Because that's what it all comes down to. That's the real problem. Love is lacking here. And they pass their judgment, but it's without any love. I have no problem with religion. You know, oftentimes I talk about religion, and here I am standing up here talking about religion. I think religion is wonderful, as long as it's a true religion. And the truest measure of truth, you know what it is. Watch out for the wolves in sheep's clothing. Beware of false prophets, Jesus said. You'll know them by their fruit. The truest test of truth is, where's the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? Where's the love? Where's the fruit? That's always the truest test of what's true. And I like the way that James puts it. At least it helps me. The brother of Jesus, James, he says this. He says, "This you know, my beloved." You see, I don't have to worry about that you guys know this stuff. You guys know a lot of stuff. May not live it, but you know it. So you're like me. He says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, but let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man doesn't achieve the righteousness of God." You're not going to make things right by getting mad. That doesn't bring about the righteousness of God. So he says, "Put aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, and in humility receive the word of God implanted, which is able to save your souls. And prove yourselves to be doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves." Not just hearing or even memorizing, but do you live? Is love something a part of your life? Where's the fruit? Where's the proof? In humility, you receive the word implanted. The seed gets in and the fruit starts to come out. All of that. And he said, if anyone thinks himself to be religious and doesn't control his tongue, with all of this anger and all of this stuff going on, he says, if you think you're religious and you don't bridle your tongue, you deceive your own heart, and your religion is worthless. But he says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is to visit orphans and widows in their distress. Go to people who really have needs and then help them with their needs. That's true religion. That's love. And then keep yourself unstained from the world. Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, boastful pride of life. That's the real deal. But when religion gets divorced from love, when love gets left out and you still have the religion, I think history proves, certainly what we're looking at today shows, that religion divorced from love is about the coldest, cruelest, most brutal force on the face of the planet. We saw it last week. It was the religious police that were spitting in the face of Jesus, slugging him in the face, making a mockery. That was the religious police, and now it's the religious court. He'll come before the civil court. He'll come before Herod. He'll come before Pilate. That's stuff we'll look at later. But this is the religious police, the religious court that condemns him. And this is their last judgment. The system's over after this. This is the final judgment. They make it themselves. When it was day, it says, verse 66, the whole council of the elders of the people assembled, both the chief priests and the scribes. They were all there. They led him away to their council. And they said, "If you're the Messiah, just tell us." Now, it wasn't because they wanted to know, you know that. They're just trying to find something in the light so that they can say and bring it to Pilate and do the deal. If you're the Messiah, just tell us. And he said to them, if I tell you, you won't believe. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, says Jesus. If anyone's open to him, he'll tell you more, if you're open. It's the way it works with a lot of conversations. Are you open to even hear? And here's Jesus. He stands and knocks, but he says, look, you're not open. I could knock some more, I could tell you some more, but you don't want to hear it. If I tell you, you're not going to believe. You're not receptive. You don't have the ears to hear. Again, Jesus would say so often, rather than try and argue people into the kingdom, you can't do that. He says, let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. If you're open, if your ears are open, if your heart is open, then here's what I got to say. But these folks, sadly, they're closed. And so he says, got no more words to say to you. You don't have ears to hear, I don't have words to say. That's mercy. Oftentimes it's mercy when you just quit talking. Have some mercy, quit throwing the words at someone who doesn't even want to hear. In the case of Jesus, everything he says is absolute truth, and the fact is that you're accountable for the more things that you know, and they don't even want to know what they already know. So in mercy, he says, I've got nothing more to say. You don't have ears to hear, I don't have words to say. If I tell you, you're not going to believe. And then he says, if I ask you a question, you're not going to answer. He says, I can't give honest words to you because you're not open, and I can't get honest words out of you because you don't want to be honest. Again, the hour and the power of darkness belongs to you. You don't really want to know. You don't want to know. Now, we'd seen, and I'm moving a little faster than I usually do. So let's go back just for a minute. We've read it recently, chapter 20, the times when he would ask them questions and they wouldn't open up. I think it's very much of an illustration. Chapter 20, the beginning, it says there in verse 1, chapter 20, that it came about on one of those days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the good news that the chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him. Here's that whole gang again. And here it is in the daytime, here it is in the temple, here's one of those places where they wouldn't dare lay hands on him. And here they are, and they spoke, saying to him, tell us by what authority you're doing these things, or who's the one who gave you this authority? And he said to them, I'll ask you a question, and you tell me. Was the baptism of John the Baptist, did that come from heaven, or did that come from men? And then they talked within themselves and among themselves. And they said, if we say it's from heaven, then he'll say, why didn't you believe in John the Baptist? If we say that's just from men, then everyone here is going to stone us to death, and we don't like that idea. Because they're convinced that John the Baptist was a prophet. And they answered, they didn't know where it came from. That's pure politics. That's pure save my skin. It's not about what's true or not what's not true. It's just about what move am I going to make on the chessboard to keep myself from getting checkmated. Man, you play those games when it comes to truth. If the light within you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And can even the Son of Man get through to you when you've got that kind of wall up? Religious walls are the worst walls. And you got that one up and you're self-righteous on your side of it. And they say, we don't know. And all of it's a lie. And Jesus, again, he's so consistent. Jesus said, neither am I going to tell you by what authority I do these things. In mercy, I've got no more words to talk to say to. And then that chapter goes on. They start asking him questions. Every time they ask a question, they don't want an answer. They're laying a trap. Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? What do you think? What about the afterlife? Is that for real or is that not? What do you think? What's the great commandment of the law? Which one's the greatest? And you remember the answers Jesus gave. Every time they tried to trap him, he tried to free them. Of course there's life after death. All souls live to God. Give yourself to God. Don't worry about taxes. Pay Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And the greatest commandment, the one that everything hangs on, is love. Loving your neighbor as yourself, loving God All of that, they tried to trap him. And then at the end of chapter 20, it says, verse 39, that some of the scribes answered him. This is 20:39. Some of the scribes answered and said, "Teacher, you've spoken well." Good answers to our trap questions. But they didn't have courage to try to trap him any longer. They didn't have courage to ask any more questions because they were afraid. They're trying to trap him. He's trying to free them from their religious prejudice, from their religious bias, from their sense of, we see, we know, we're the stewards of the things that Moses handed down. We're the protectors of that system. Strain out the gnat and swallow the camel. He's trying to free them. And they're like, no, you're not going to trick us into freedom. Not going to trick us into letting go. And they didn't have any more courage to ask him a question, but the Lord has more love. He asked them one more question. He said to them, "How is it that they say the Messiah is David's son? For David himself said in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet.' David therefore calls him Lord. How can he be his son?" And I'm not going to, if you don't understand that, I'm not going to try to explain it because we don't have time. They understood it. And simply this: Jesus is saying, you guys like the scriptures, you like the letter of the law, go back and read it again. You memorized it, now go back and read it and think about it. And you know what? The Messiah is way more than you know. He's not just the son of David, he's the Lord of David. The Messiah, you don't see because you got this system that keeps it boxed in. And so you don't see outside your box. You don't see outside your walls. And you've lost the love. So much so that you could condemn Christ and think it's the right thing to do. Scary. But that's the way it worked. And so here he is on trial again, and actually they're on trial, and he says, look, if I tell you, you won't believe. If I ask you, you won't answer. That's the way it's been all along. So back here in Luke 22, if I tell you, you won't believe. If I ask you a question, you won't answer. And then he said, verse 69, from now on, whether you like it or not, whether you judge it or not, whether you want it or not, from now on, the Son of Man is going to be seated at the right hand of power. Yeah. That's who he is. He's the Son of Man. And he says, you make your judgment, but I'm still going to be in the place of power, at the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, now they're all outraged. Now everyone's like, oh, we were just asking, are you the Messiah? Now you're claiming to be something so much more than Messiah. You're claiming to be that one that Daniel talks about. You're claiming to be the one to whom all judgment will be given. You're claiming yourself to be the Son of God. And now they're just like, wow, we thought we'd get you in the Messiah trap. And now you stepped right into the Son of God trap. And they all said, are you the Son of God then? And he said, yeah. Yes, I am. You said it. It came out of your mouth. Truth came out of your mouth for once. I am. I am. They didn't hear it. To them, that was just like, aha, we got him. He trapped himself. He speaks the truth. They see it as a trap. He said, yes, I am. They said, what further need do we have of testimony? All you false witnesses we've got lined up, you can all go home. We don't need any more of that stuff. We have trapped him with the truth. It came out of his own mouth, but they don't see it as the truth. But it is the truth. What else is Jesus going to say? What further need do we have of testimony? We've heard it ourselves coming out of his own mouth, and boom, down goes the gavel. Our religious judgment is sound. And that gavel comes down on their own heads. And they don't see it. It's easy to see in other nations, to see in other religions, to see in other times what crazy things people have done to other people in the name of their system or their religion or their politics or whatever. It's always easier to see out there somewhere. But whenever we point the finger, we miss the point. What does that say about us? And what might be happening in our own hearts in dealing with people? Where might our religion in some way be a little bit separated from love? And that's the main point, always. Always. That's their final judgment. It doesn't mean that that's the final judgment on their souls. That always belongs between an individual and God. Good place for it to belong. But that's the final judgment on their system. It's over. It's over. But it's not the final judgment of Jesus, not the final judgment of God. Within hours, Jesus is going to be saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. You know, the final judgment that I fear the most isn't God's judgment on me, it's my judgment on others. Those are the judgments that do the most damage to me. And those are the ones that Jesus was continually warning his disciples about. Back to Luke 12. We just kept coming back to Luke 12 because it was such a poignant point. It says, during these times when people were stepping on one another because they want to get closer to Jesus, during those crazy times, that's when Jesus turned to his disciples and said, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Watch out for that subtle influence that could work inside of yourself. And then he begins to tell them, don't be afraid of God. Don't be afraid of the one who attends the fall of every sparrow. But there is something to fear. There is something to watch out for. And this was the darkest day. And from noon to 3, darkness fell over the face of the land. And you know, I don't think that's a reflection of God's judgment. I think it's a reflection of their judgment. They're this tribunal, this Supreme Court, this supreme religious place that's supposed to make if anyone's going to make a right ruling, it should have been them. And when they made the worst judgment could ever be made, the whole sun, the whole light around them was darkened. And again, it's a lesson for us all. God did give a precious gift to Moses. And everything in the Old Testament leads up to Jesus. And God gave to Moses a system of law and justice and fairness and equity. Something that many of our laws, the good laws, are based upon still. But all of it was meant to be wrapped in the fact that the greatest is love. And God, back in the days of Moses, set a spark. It was literally a flame. He set it upon an altar, and it was their job for the next 1,400 years, don't let that flame go out. Keep the flame on the altar, go in there and light the menorah that's inside, or the candlestick inside the holy place. Your job, priests, your job, people, is just don't let that light go out. Go in there and tend to it and work with it and realize it's born upon sacrifice. It's the whole picture was one of love. And so keep that flame going. And so now the representatives of that long, enduring flame see the light of the world. They see Jesus. They pronounce it to be darkness. What else is? Of course it's the darkest day. It's the end of that system. But it's not the end of the light. You see, we bring on the darkness. They brought on the darkness. You and I can bring on the darkness. We can do it individually. We can do it as a congregation. We can do it as any system, political system. We can agree to keep something on the other side that love would say, I think love wouldn't do that. God's judgment, God is a consuming fire. Doesn't that scare you? Doesn't scare me. A creative fire, a consuming fire, a cleansing fire. God is love. God is a fire. It's the same thing. It's the love that it burns when we burn others. But it cleanses when we, like Peter, just melt and say, what have I been doing? What's been happening? What have I been doing to myself? So we bring on the darkness, bad news. I mean, who knows how much bad news we don't even know about yet. But the good news is the light still shines. Jesus went forth And all that darkness of that day, Jesus walked through it, kept his lamp, kept his light, kept his love. It's amazing. Your mind can go ahead, I hope. We're going to go through those verses in the next several weeks. But he was in control. He was like a king there on the cross. He was protecting, he was providing. He's beautiful. And he's the one I always, if I can paint a picture, if I can take these words and help you to see what it says, I hope you understand that's who your God is. That's how he loves you. That's how he cares for you. We bring on the darkness and he goes through it. The darkness we brought on, he faces it. So that we can see a friend, so that we can leave our own darkness behind and follow after him. And though these religious men bring down the gavel and say, that's it, and they bring down their system when they do that, the Son of Man is still the Son of Man. Jesus has the final say. The one who said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, he has the final say. That's the final judge. That's the one that I have my hope in. And to help you see what they didn't see it. It's not because they didn't know the scripture. They knew this scripture. They just didn't want to see it. But to help you to see what he said, turn with me just for a moment back to Daniel. You don't have to turn too terribly far, one of the closer prophets to the New Testament. But if you can find it fast, if you can't, tough luck. You can look at it later. But if you want to read along with me, Daniel chapter 7, because this is what Jesus was quoting from. When he stood there, he said, look, if I try to give you honest words, you don't want them. If I ask for honest answers, you won't give them. But here's what's going to happen. And this is what he quotes from, so I'll just start reading Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. And here the prophet says, I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days, that God himself, took his seat. And his vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, and his throne was ablaze with flames, and its wheels were a burning fire, and a river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. And thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. And the court sat, and all the books were opened. And then Daniel says, I kept looking, because of the sound of the boastful words that this little horn was speaking. I kept looking until that beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning fire. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. And you know that those last couple of verses I just read may have more of your attention than anything I've said today, and that's too bad. I'm sorry for that. Because it's the 10 horns, this is the Antichrist, it's the boastful beast, I read a book about this once, that's not the point. There have always been beasts, there will always be beasts. Many of them are in our own hearts, watch out. They're always a distraction, they always take our attention away, they're always boastful, they've always got big mouths. But don't let your attention be turned there. They're all going to lose. They're all going to lose. They're all going to be history. But when Daniel's talking about all of that and the boastful stuff, he says, and here's what I would say, do what Daniel did. He says, I kept looking. Don't stop looking. Like Peter, look around. Look for that friendly face. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. Jesus said, look, I can't get justice from you. I can't even give an honest word to, and I can't get an honest word from you. But you know what? The Son of Man is going to be in power. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to be in power and you're going to be sorry. You're already sorry. You don't know you're sorry, but you're sorry. You're already in a sorry state. You've already made the mess. You're bringing the judgment upon yourself. But I'm coming to free people. Anyone who wants to be free, I will free you. The Son of Man is coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given all judgment. To him was given dominion, glory, a kingdom, that all peoples, Gentiles, Jews, everyone, nations, all men of every language, they all might serve him. That's freedom. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion. It won't pass away. His kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. That's good news. He wasn't, they're judging him harshly. He's not threatening them. I'm going to be in power. And he's saying, even though you do what you do, I'm still going to do what I do. I'm still going to be who I am. And whoever wants mercy, whoever wants hope, whoever wants forgiveness, whoever wants out of the darkness, if you ever want out of the darkness, he's your man. He's the Son of Man. He's not ashamed to call us family, as crazy as we are and as crazy as we've been. He's for you. He cares for you. And he was giving them a word of huge hope. And right over their heads. No, more like bounce right off their hearts. They've already decided. They already know the way it is. That's why, once again, I'm just going to leave you with this reminder from the Proverbs. Watch over your own heart with all diligence, because out of it flow all the issues of life. Watch out for your own darkness. Watch out for your own decisions that were made really just to protect your deal, and love was left out. Watch out for the judgments that you pass upon others, because they fall upon you. And if you follow the Lord of light and love, you don't need to be afraid. Perfect love casts out all fear. I think, and I don't know. If I stood up here and told you funny stories, it'd probably be easier to follow, and you might even remember the funny stories I told. I like to do that. Sometimes I got a funny story. I don't have a whole lot today. But I've got something. What I'm sharing is so powerful, so true. It may be hard to stay awake and take it all in. I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. But just understand there's nothing greater than the kind of things that I'm hoping you'll see here today. Your God loves you. And just like heaven itself, the final judgment happens here. It's your own heart. He stands and he knocks. Trust him. Don't trust anybody else. That's fine. I'm not asking you to trust me. I mean, we got to work with each other. There's all kinds of agreements so that we don't blow each other up. But ultimately, trust the Lord with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. And watch out for your religious conclusions. Be careful. Where's the fruit? That's always the measure. That's the measure. Let's turn to him with a couple of closing songs.